There are going to be some games where you low roll and you're forced to roll down on stage 4-1. In a lot of cases, I think many people are a little confused on how they're supposed to be playing the roll down on this stage. I see them often rolling down for their final comps or carries, like 2-starring their Kale or their Olaf or Tryndamere, and then they end up not hitting and then they go 8th. You usually want to be playing around a 3-cost carry in these situations like SIVIR, KINDRED, KALISTA, KENNEN, because the chances of you hitting a 4-cost carry at level 7 is really low. In this video, I'm going to show you a bunch of level 7 boards that you should be building around instead of donkey rolling for something like a Kale 2. As I said in my previous video, this is going to be a pretty general guide, so don't follow it exactly, but I recommend you to familiarize yourself with these boards and use it as a template. So one really strong mid-game board in the current meta is Keeper Kennen. So if you hit Keeper Kennen, you usually want to be playing around at least 4 keepers. On your 4-1 roll down, there's a chance you could hit Xayah. So if you hit Xayah, you want to be playing around 6 keepers because 6 keepers is a really strong synergy. And because you're playing around Kennen, you want Aatrox in because one of the core synergies between this comp is you have Aatrox pull their backline in and then Kennen will AoE their whole team. So I'm just going to put in Aatrox. And then you need a 7th unit to play, so you want to round out your synergies. So in this case, I'm just going to play a 3rd Elderwood. So you could play something like a Maokai, or if you find something better, you could play something like a NUNU instead. If you hit a board like this on stage 4-1, 95% of the time, you want to be committing onto your Keeper Kennen build. One thing to note is that you don't have to hit Keeper Kennen to play this build. You could also hit your Keeper Jarvan or a Keeper Rakan on stage 4-1 and you could still play it. But the thing is, usually I would only pick up a Keeper Rakan or a Keeper Jarvan if I'm already committed to the Keeper comp. And I usually am only committed to that comp if I have something like a Morello or I already have a 2-star Kennen. So for example, if I hit a Keeper Jarvan or Keeper Rakan and I don't know if I'm committed to keepers yet, and I don't have a single Kennen, I probably won't be taking it. But if I already have a 2-star Kennen and I have Morello components and I hit a Keeper Jarvan or Keeper Rakan, I would probably take it and commit onto the Keeper build and play around that. So there's going to be cases where you don't hit your 1-star Xayah for 6 keepers, which is okay. So if you don't play Xayah, you don't want to be playing around 6 keepers, so you want to toss Elise out. And you need some other sort of backline damage. So another 3-cost unit you're often going to find on your stage 4-1 roll down is Kindred. So you want to play Kindred, and because you're playing Kindred, you want Spirit in. So in this case, I'm going to be playing Teemo. And because you're playing Teemo, you want Sharpshooters in. And this is also a very strong board on stage 4-1 that could get you to level 8. We also have one more 4-cost unit in here that you might not hit, which is Aatrox. You're going to need Aatrox later in the game, but for now, if you don't hit Aatrox, you could just play something like an Irelia. So another really strong mid-game chosen you can hit on stage 4-1 is Spirit Kindred. If you're playing Spirit Kindred, you usually want to be playing 4 Spirit for your mid-game. So in this case, I'm going to be playing around YUUMI. And for my 4th Spirit, I'm going to be playing around Teemo. And if I have Teemo, I want to be playing 2 Sharpshooters. So another great Sharpshooter you can hit on stage 4-1 is SIVIR. And the problem right now is I'm lacking a frontline for my comp. So some really good 2 or 3 cost units is Irelia and Jax. And the perfect unit to round out the rest of my synergies is Janna, because right now I'm missing 1 Enlightened and 1 Mystic. If you're playing this board on stage 4-1, most of the time you have to commit onto Kale from this spot, because if you're rolling down on stage 4-1 in the first place, chances are you were forced to because you weren't very healthy. And because you spent all your gold rolling down on stage 4-1, you won't have enough gold on level 8 to pivot into a different type of board. So another variation to this board is instead of Teemo and SIVIR, you could play Diana instead for 4 Spirit. And if you're playing Diana, this opens you up to 2 Assassin. So if you hit 2-star AKALI, AKALI is a great secondary carry in parallel with Kindred. And another variation to this is if you don't play AKALI and if you don't play Jax, you could actually instead play 4 Mystic. You can only do this if you hit Shen, and this will give you 4 Spirit and 4 Mystic, and your carry will be Kindred in this case. So I did mention that Spirit Chosen is very strong. However, there is a difference between getting a Spirit Kindred or a Spirit YUUMI. So the thing is, if you hit Spirit Kindred, it's a lot more valuable than Spirit YUUMI because on stage 4-1, you're looking for some direction. A 2-star Kindred is going to give you some direction, and you need a carry. Because let's say you don't have a YUUMI at all, but you hit a Spirit Kindred, you're probably going to be taking the Spirit Kindred because there's a lot of different things you could be playing. All you need is a frontline. But if you hit a chosen Spirit YUUMI and you don't have a Kindred, you're probably not going to be taking that Spirit YUUMI because I value the chance of hitting a chosen 3-cost carry a lot more than guaranteeing a chosen utility unit. So that's the reason why I would not take a Spirit chosen YUUMI. However, if you already have a 2-star Kindred, you could go ahead and take the Spirit Chosen YUUMI if you're lacking the utility unit, and then to round out your synergies, you could just play a random 4th Spirit to get a really strong stage 4-1 board. So the other variation to Chosen Kindred is if you hit Executioner Kindred. If you hit Executioner Kindred and you're high rolling, you might end up getting something like a 1-star Kale and a 1-star Xayah. This gives you 4 Executioner, which is a really strong trait. And if you're playing Kindred, you usually want to be playing something like a YUUMI for 2 Spirit. And in this case, since you're lacking frontline, you want something like a Shen, and you want something like a Jarvan to get 2 keepers, and you want something like an Irelia, and this is a pretty strong board stage 4-1. The issue with this comp is you're running 3 4-cost units, which is very, very unlikely on stage 4-1, and I'm not even sure if this variation is a lot stronger than the other variations, because oftentimes you're going to be playing a 1-star Shen, a 1-star Xayah, and a 1-star Kayle, which could potentially get outshined by other 2-star 3-cost units. So in this case, if you don't hit Kayle, you could actually just play around 4 keepers instead. So if you play 4 keepers, you don't need that much more frontline anymore, so I'm just going to remove Shen and Irelia, and instead I'm going to play something like a Kennen and a Rakan. And right now I'm missing a Mystic, so I could just play a random Janna to get 2 Mystic. And if you already solidified your front line with keepers, you're most likely not going to pivot into something else. You're just going to commit onto the keeper board from this spot, and you itemize your Xayah and your Kennen. So if you don't hit Xayah, and you hit 1-star Kayle instead, you can play 3 Executioners with Kayle. If you're playing Kayle, you usually want to commit onto the Kayle board, so you usually don't want to be playing these keeper units. Instead, you want Irelia back, and you also want Jax. And right now you're missing 1 unit, so this gives you 4 Divine. You also don't have to play Nasus. You could just play a second damage source since you're already playing Jax. You could play something like a Kalista. Or if you hit Shen, you could actually just play 4 Mystic. Nico actually recently got buffed, so she actually does a lot more damage than before. If you don't hit Kayle and you don't hit Shen, you could just play a flex board with Executioner Kindred. I might run a secondary carry, something like a SIVIR. And because I'm playing SIVIR, I want Teemo. And now I'm lacking some frontline, so maybe something like a Jax is good. And because I'm playing Jax, these remaining slots are pretty flexible. I could play Sharpshooters, I could play Kindred. Just make sure to be playing around your 2 and 3 cost units. A really good chosen you could hit on stage 4-1 is Sharpshooter or Cultist SIVIR. In this case, I'm going to be starting with Sharpshooter SIVIR. If you get Sharpshooter SIVIR, you usually want to be playing around 4 Sharpshooters if possible. If you're playing Teemo, you want Spirit in, so Yuumi's good. And in this case, you need some frontline. So Jax and Irelia are my go-to frontline units on stage 4-1. And finally, you just play a Janna to round out your synergies. You don't have to be playing 4 Sharpshooters. Instead of playing 4 Sharpshooters, you could play around something like a Kindred. So in this case, I'm just going to remove Teemo and remove Nidalee. And because you're playing Jax, you could secondary carry with something like a Kalista, because Kalista is another 3-cost unit that you could often find on stage 4-1. From this spot, if you have a chosen SIVIR, you could either play Kayle or Slayers depending on your items, because SIVIR usually benefits a lot from Last Whisper, Runan, so if you have those items, you could consider playing Slayers on stage 5-1, or if you have a Gwynsu's or RFC, you could pivot into a Kayle board as well. So the other variation to chosen SIVIR is if you get Cultist SIVIR. If you get Cultist SIVIR, this opens you up to 6 Cultists. I know I did mention in my last video that 6 Cultists is very, very strong mid-game, but the difference is if you get Cultist SIVIR mid-game, chances are you're not going to be holding a Elise or TF, because you had no idea you were going to play 6 Cultists mid-game, and in that case, you probably already sold your Elise and TF for Econ, and it's very, very hard to find those units back on stage 4-1. So in this case, you usually want to be playing around only 3 Cultists. So in this case, the best Cultist you could play with chosen Cultist SIVIR is Aatrox, and if you play Aatrox, you want to be playing around 2 Vanguards. If you get Sejuani, you play Sejuani, but that's pretty high roll. If you don't get Sejuani, you just play something random like a Braum. And because you're playing a SIVIR, you want 2 Sharpshooters in, and Teemo opens you up to Spirit, so you want Yuumi in, and then a good Mystic to tech in would be Janna. And finally, you could just play a random Irelia to round out your synergies. The other variation, if you don't hit Aatrox, because Aatrox is a 4-cost unit, is you can just play a random 2-star Pike if you hit it. There's no need to play this Braum because you don't have 2 Vanguards anymore. Maybe something like a Jax. Another alternative to this is if you're playing a frontline that has Jax and Irelia, you don't have to play Pike. Instead, because you're playing Jax, you can play Kalista for 2 Duelists. And it also gives you 3 Cultists as well because you're playing chosen SIVIR. So the last variation I'm going to talk about with Cultist SIVIR is if you get Vladimir, and because you're playing Vladimir, you want to round out your synergies with something like a Morgana. I would only play this variation if you 2-star your Vlad and you get a Morello on your Morgana. If you end up playing this variation and you don't have Morello, you end up lacking a frontline, which is this variation's major weakness. I tend to not play this variation. I prefer the other ones more with more frontline, but this is another variation you could play if you get a Morello. Cultist Kalista is pretty much the exact same thing. The only difference is instead of playing 2 Sharpshooters, you want to be playing around 2 Duelists instead. And the variations of Cultist Kalista is actually very similar to SIVIR. So you can just refer to my previous examples whenever you get a chosen Cultist Kalista. So the other variation to Kalista that I'm going to be talking about is a chosen Duelist Kalista. If you get chosen Duelist Kalista, you usually want to be playing around 4 Duelists. So in this case, I'm going to be playing a Jax. And my 4th Duelist is going to be a Tryndamere if you're high rolling. Because you're playing Jax, you want another Divine, so Irelia is good. And because you're playing Irelia, Janna is good, and you need another Mystic. Finally, to round out your synergies, you want 2 Spirit in, so Kindred is good. If you don't get a Tryndamere, you could just play a random Duelist, so you could play something like a Fiora. And because you're running 3 Enlightened, there's a chance you might want to play 4. But I would probably only play this variation if I have Morello and Morgana. Otherwise, I think I prefer the Kindred more. And if you hit Shen, you could just replace Janna with Shen instead. Usually in this case, you want to stack Kalista with something like a Runans. If you have a Runans, you could pivot your board into Slayers, but again, it's really hard to pivot this board into Slayers because you end up having to sell your entire board, and you're not very rich when you're rolling down at 4-1 anyway. So usually from this spot, it's way better to pivot into Kale because you already have most of the units for Kale, and you could just stack your Gwynsu's or RFC on your Kalista, and then you could pivot into Kale on stage 5-1. So the next mid-game board I'm going to be talking about is if you get Chosen Brawler. So for example, Chosen SHYVANA. So if you get Chosen SHYVANA that's a Brawler, you usually want to be trying to play around 6 Brawlers. And in this spot, if you get a Chosen SHYVANA, you want to round out your synergies. So you want 3 Dragon Soul in. And if you don't get Aesol, you can just play a random 3rd Dragon Soul, like a random Braum. So usually in this spot, you usually want to be stacking your SHYVANA and your NUNU. Good items for SHYVANA are Hodge, Runans. Good items for NUNU, if you 2-star him, are Gunblade, Bramble, Warmog. That's the Chinese NUNU build. So another variation to this board is instead of playing 6 Brawlers, you have the option of playing 3 Elderwood for 3 mages. And right now we're missing a Dragon Soul, so I'm just going to take out one of my Brawlers for Braum for 3 Dragon Soul as well. So all these board I just listed apply to both Chosen SHYVANA and Chosen NUNU. Your win con for this is 3-starring your SHYVANA or 3-starring your NUNU. If you have good items for SHYVANA, you want to 3-star your SHYVANA. If you have good items for NUNU, you want to 3-star your NUNU instead. At level 8, you have the option to roll down for 8 Brawlers. So you want to look for Set, and you want to look for Cho'Gath. If you don't hit those, you could just play 6 Brawlers and flex any random legendaries you hit. And you want to play around your 3-star NUNU or 3-star SHYVANA. If you hit Aesol and you have good items for Aesol, you could also take out one of your mages for Aesol. And then you just play Aesol carry from this spot if you have your Brawler chosen. So I'm going to just briefly talk about Elderwood. I don't think Elderwood Chosen is very, very good to take right now in your mid game. Because when you take Elderwood Chosen, a lot of the times it forces you to play 6 Elderwood. I would probably only take Elderwood Chosen under 2 conditions. One of the conditions is if you have an Elder Spat and you have really, really good items for Aesol. In that case, you could consider playing around Eldersoul. You put the Elderwood Spat on Aesol and then you stack all your AP items on him. The other situation where I might consider taking Chosen NUNU that's Elderwood or a Chosen VEIGAR that's Elderwood is if I'm very, very close to hitting a 3-star copy of NUNU or VEIGAR. In that case, I probably would take it because there's a very, very high chance of me hitting a 3-star NUNU or a 3-star VEIGAR. And in a situation like this, when I'm rolling down on stage 4-1, I'm probably playing for top 4 anyway. And that's not a bad play to 3-star your NUNU and 3-star your VEIGAR in that case. Another great Chosen you could look for at stage 4-1 is Mage Chosen. This could either be Mage VEIGAR, Mage LULU, or Mage Annie. Doesn't matter as long as you could collect 7 mages during your mid game. For your last unit, you just play a random unit to round out your synergies. Because we're lacking a frontline, I like Braum because he's a really good solo frontline that you could parallel with Annie. Or if you don't get Braum, you could just play something like a SHYVANA or a random Elderwood like NUNU. If you get Mage Spat, you want to take out one of your mages, play SHYVANA for now, and then you could put the Mage Spat on SHYVANA. Later on in the game, when you hit level 8, you can roll down for Swain 2, and once you get Swain, you can sell your SHYVANA and transfer over the Mage Spat onto Swain, because Swain is one of the best units that makes use of the Mage Spat. Win condition for this build is you hit 3-star Annie or 2-star Swain with Mage Spat. If you're really close to 3-star Annie, you could consider slow rolling for it. Otherwise, you could just go 8 and try and 2-star your Swain. If you don't hit 7 mages during your mid-game rolldown, another variation you could play is you just play 5 mages instead. You could just play this board mid-game to stabilize you, but later on in the game, you really do need to pivot your board into 7 mages because 7 mages is one of the most broken comps in the game right now. So a really underrated mid-game carry, in my opinion, is Slayer Darius. If you get Slayer Darius, you want to play another Slayer. So Pyke is a really good standalone Slayer because he provides a lot of CC. Darius is a unit that if he has the right items, he could 1v9. So I'm assuming you only pick up this unit if you have really good items for him. Good items for him are something like Gunblade, GA, Jeweled Gauntlet. And if you have items like this, you usually want to be playing around Fortune because you're going to be winning fights anyway. So in this case, I'm going to play Annie and I'm going to play Tom Kench. Because you were forced to roll on stage 4-1, playing Fortune gives you some comeback potential to get back into the game at level 8. Notice how these items on Darius are actually perfect items for Aesol. One of the comps you want to be playing towards with Chosen Darius is Aesol. So in this case, you want to start slowly transitioning your board into that. So usually you want to play 3 mages with Annie. So you don't have to play a mage backline. You could take out the Lulu and VEIGAR and you could play Sharpshooters instead. Instead of SIVIR, you could also play Kindred. Your frontline is pretty flexible too. You don't have to play Fortune because Fortune does make you weaker. So if you don't want to play Fortune, you can play a different frontline instead. And this is also a very, very strong board. Alternatively, you don't need to play Kindred either. You could play Kalista if you're playing Jax. This gives you 2 Duelist. There's a lot of different variations to this. Darius is a very, very flexible unit to play mid-game. One thing to note is that if you're playing a secondary carry like Kalista or Kindred, make sure Darius and Kalista are on the same side, because Kalista will help Darius get the first reset. When you're playing your mid-game around Darius, usually you're going to have a lot of AP items. As I mentioned before, you want to try pivoting this board into an ASO board if possible. Otherwise, you could also consider keeping this Darius for the rest of the game. Maybe try 3-starring your Darius, and then you can secondary carry Tryndamere when you get him. So the other variation to this is if you get Fortune Darius. In my opinion, I don't really like Fortune Darius as much as Slayer Darius, but it's still good if you have the items to support Darius. So if you get Fortune Darius, you literally just play a random Fortune. The issue with playing Fortune Darius is you have to run 2 other Slayers. Pyke was a good standalone Slayer, but there's no really good other standalone Slayer at this point in the game. Like, for example, you're going to be looking for a 3rd Slayer, something like Zed. Zed really isn't that good at stage 4-1. And even if you get something like a Tryndamere or Olaf, these units are probably going to be 1-star, and they probably aren't going to have a lot of items at this point in the game. And in a spot like this, you usually are going to be lacking some frontline, which is why I prefer Slayer Darius a little bit more over Fortune Darius. So the last Chosen I'm going to be talking about mid-game is Chosen AKALI. So if you get Chosen AKALI, you usually want to be playing it with 4 ninjas if you hit Shen. So in this case, I'm just going to be playing a Shen. And then to round out your synergies, you want to play 2 more assassins. If you don't get Talon, you could play something like a Diana instead. And then if you play Diana, this opens you up to Spirit. So you could play something like a YUUMI. And this gives you Mystic and Spirit. The other variations to this, if you don't hit Shen, is to play Force Spirit instead. And now I need a random Mystic to round out my synergies because you're no longer running Shen. So I'm just going to be playing a Janna. The issue with these 2 variations is you're most likely going to be playing around AKALI and trying to 3-star her to win the game. There's not much flexibility. However, you don't actually have to play these variations if you get Chosen AKALI. You could just play a standard frontline and backline comp, and in those comps, it's way easier to pivot into another board. So I'm going to show you another example board without ninjas or spirit. In a spot like this, it's way easier to pivot into a different board because you're no longer only holding ninjas or assassins, flexible frontline and flexible backline to transition your board into something else. And from this spot, based on the units you have, it's most likely going to be Kale. Kali is actually a really good item holder for Kale because she could hold RFC, and she could also hold Jeweled Gauntlet. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and comment down below. Set 5 is coming out in a few weeks, and I'm going to be playing a lot of PBE before then to release a similar video like this for early and mid game. So if you want to be caught up on the best boards, you should consider subscribing to my channel. I also recently hit 1,000 subscribers, and I wanted to thank everyone for the support. If you have any questions about the game, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.